Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we are in round 4 of our coverage of the 2018 Candidates Tournament. Winner of this tournament does go on to face Magnus Carlsen in the World Championship in November. Our two competitors today are currently leading. White's going to be played by Vladimir Kramnik. He is a half a point ahead of the field. In playing black, that is Fabiano Caruana. He is a half a point behind in second place. So this is a huge match. These players will face each other one more time where Fabiano will have the white pieces. But definitely with two of the best chess players in the field squaring off, it's always going to be fireworks. So we're going to get started with pawn 2e4. Pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, getting into the Petrov opening. And then after knight takes here, pawn to d6. This is the normal variation, kicking the knight back. And then after the knight comes here, I was expecting to see the normal main line, which would be pawn to d4. Sometimes you'll see knight to c3. In the Petrov defense, usually this is a very drawish line, which makes a lot of sense for these two players. They don't want to get too carried away. They are leading the tournament, and so there's no reason for anyone to get out of line too much. Then we see queen to e2, queen e7. Then after knight c3 in the exchange, the pawn capturing here. Then we see the queens come off the board. Now, if the Petrov is a very drawish opening, exchanging the queens off the board after only 8 moves is even more so on the drawish side. But we will continue. Knight here to c6, simple development, bishop to e3. Bishop to e7, castle on the queen side, castle on the king side. So if we have anything going for us as fans, it's that both sides decided to castle on opposite sides, which just means they can throw everything they want at their opponent's side and start a strong attack. Rook here to e1, bishop to f6. So both sides just developing their pieces just as they normally would. Knight back here to d2, rook to e8, just attacking the center of the board here. Bishop to f3, knight here to e5, and then bishop to f4. This is being protected, this bishop here on f3. The knight can't take here. The rook would come up here. This would be a checkmate. So we have Vladimir is not ready to give up his bishop pair here. Does want to attack this knight in the center of the board. King comes over here to f8, protecting this rook right here so that black is free to take this bishop here on f3 if Vladimir does not do anything. He does. He brings his bishop here to d5. Pawn to c6, then the bishop comes back here to b3. Very common square for the bishop to come back to once you've castled on the queen side of the board, something Bobby Fischer used to do quite a bit. Many times when he was playing it, the queens would still be on board, but he'd be playing pawn to a3, even bringing his bishop back here to a2. Really controls this long diagonal. Many times your opponent can forget about it and just has to worry about this as a strong attack the rest of the game. Bishop down to f5, just completing the development from black. Pawn to h3, and this is where things get interesting. I was not expecting black to be this aggressive. Usually you're seeing moves like pawn to a5, just starting to throw your queen side at your opponent because you've castled on the king side. But Fabiano says, nope, that's not my game plan. I see an attack that I can start, and I'm going to go ahead and start pushing forward with pawn here to g5. Forcing the bishop to come back to h2. King to g7, pawn up here to c4, and then pawn to g4. So you can already see black is trying to be as aggressive as possible, thinking that he can maybe find something out of this game. Knight here to e4, bishop takes, rook recaptures, a bishop to g5 check, king here to b1, and then the pawn takes. And this is where things get interesting. I thought we would see a snap just take right here. I think this is fine from White's perspective. He's not too worried about any threats going on in the current board state. But instead of recapturing this pawn here on h3, we see Vladimir Kramnik play pawn to c5. Now, as you go down an extended view of different lines that both sides could take, it's not necessarily that he's losing material. It's the fact that, pawn to f5, forcing the rook to move, rook over here to b4, pawn takes on g2. White just has to deal with so many threats, and this pawn here on g2 is a nuisance for White to deal with. I think it just is much easier if pawn takes here on h3. Black doesn't have any huge threats. White can easily just develop his pieces as he would like to. But now rook up here to b7 check. King to h8. Pawn takes on d6. So does have a pass pawn of his own here on d6. Knight down here to f3 is pretty devastating from White's point of view. The rook is now free to come down here to e2. Always going to want to get your rooks on your opponent's second rank if you're black. And if you're white, you can see I always want to get it up here to the 7th rank. They're usually going to have some material of sorts that you can start to attack, or you can just get behind enemy lines. It's always difficult for them to deal with. Also opens up for an attack here on h2, and it is defending the square here on g1. White is able to defend it right now with both the rook and the bishop here on h2, but still just the threat, knowing that there is a pawn that can at any point push forward, really keeps these pieces at bay. Now White plays bishop here to a4, attacking the pawn. The knight goes and takes here on h2. Bishop takes on c6. Rook over here to d8. Pawn comes up here. Rook down here to e2. This is a great square, exactly where Fabiano would end up liking to be. The bishop is now able to take here on g2. Then we see a rook takes on f2, a bishop back here to c6, protecting the pawn. He does need to make sure that he can protect this passed pawn. Knight up here to g4, and then the rook takes on a7. So this is, at the end of the day, the line that both players were looking at. Fabiano thought, hey, if you want to continue down this line, that's fine. I thought you would have just taken my pawn here on h3. But Vladimir Kramnik, he calculated out 7 or so moves and said, yes, this is the line I want to go down. I've taken my opponent's passed pawn. I'm going to give up material here in exchange for 2 pawns. I'm going to give them a minor piece, but I do have a passed pawn here on d7. It is going to be interesting to see how Vladimir Kramnik can turn this into an advantage. Most of his pawns are back here on the 2nd rank, and Fabiano can easily get his material involved. He already has a pawn here on f5. He can start to push that up the board. He has a lot of material to help that as well. And you see White, he does have both of his rooks. They are not connected. So will have to change up his game plan, maneuver around if he's going to have an advantage. Right now, I would definitely give the upper hand to black. We see knight to e3. This does a couple things. One, it attacks the rook here on d1, but it also opens up the door for an attack here on c2. Rook over here to c2, and then it's also attacking the bishop here on c6. Huge threat. Rook to g1. And I thought for sure we would see rook takes on c2. Hey, if you want to take my bishop, that's fine. I'll go ahead and take your bishop up here. I think that's completely reasonable. When you're up in material, which black is up in material, trading down is not a bad thing at all. It really will just make your advantage even that much more prominent in the game, because your opponent doesn't have enough material to kind of overcome that. Well, right now, there's still significant enough material for your opponent, even if they are down a pawn or two, that they can actually come back from that, just from a strategic standpoint. But we see instead pawn to h6. So is worried about the rook taking here on g5. Not sure if he just didn't like the fact that he could take this pawn and this bishop up here on c6 in exchange for his bishop, but decided to go ahead and play h6. Now rook over here to c7. King to g7, pawn up to a4. So recognizing he needs to start pushing on the board. That's exactly what he does. Pawn to a4. King to f7. And then bishop back here to b5. It is an outpost. Not worried too much. It's not in the center of the board. It's not the best outpost, but nonetheless, it is something that black has to worry about. King here to e7. Pawn to a5. Hey, if you have a passed pawn, rule number 1 is push that pawn as fast as possible. Rook here to f4. Pawn c3. King to d6. I don't really feel like this does exactly what he would like it to do. Another option that he would have here is rook to g4, just forcing an exchange right here, trying to get down in material, but decides to go ahead and play king here to d6. White continues with rook to b7, rook over here to g4, now plays the move, rook to e1, attacking the knight, pawn to f4, just pushing. also has protection that he can now get his dark square bishop involved into the game. One good thing that Fabiano has going for him is that this pass pawn here on d7, it's going to promote to a dark square. He does have a dark square bishop that he can protect that if he ever does want to get his rook involved into the game and not play defense. So pawn here on f4 is very important for this outpost of the knight here on e3. But pawn to a6. So Vladimir continuing with the game plan of pushing as many pawns as possible, recognizing that he has an opportunity just to overwhelm his opponent now. Black hasn't done too much. If you look at the board state 10-15 moves ago, you haven't really seen Black do all that much from his progression on the king side of the board here. Pawn to h5, could have done his own f3, pushing the pawn. I think this does give him options. Decides to play pawn to h5, pawn to a7, rook over here to a8, and then pawn up to b4. Pawn pushing forward on h4, and then c4. And this is where I think white really should have decided to push one of his pawns and promote. Let's say pawn to d8, and he gets a queen. Okay, well, a couple options of what we could see here. Let's say the bishop takes here on d8, then rook to d7, check. Now we're going to see the king come over here to e6. Can't take it because the bishop here on b5 is protecting it. And now bishop up here to c6, attacking the rook. And this gets tricky because there's no great square for the rook to go to. It can't come here to b8, it's going to be captured. If it comes here to c8, then, okay, just the bishop could come here, and at the end of the day, the pawn's just going to promote. That's not going to be a good plan. So rook would more than likely just take here on a7. We could see the rook take, and now all of a sudden, I think this is completely fine. White has gotten back into the game as far as material. He has the 2 rooks compared to his opponent only has 1. I think in this situation, white is doing completely okay. But he decides to play c4 instead, does not want to push his pawn and promote that right away. Pawn to h3. So both sides, you can really see how things are progressing. Each side, as they're calculating every move, they always have to keep in mind that their opponent is pushing pawns as well, which just makes the variations that much harder to calculate all the possible lines. Pawn to c5, check. Then we see king to e5, getting into the center of the board. Rook up here to b8. Now the pawn comes off the board. I'm not really sure I like this, giving up your pawn. You have such a strong pawn here on a7 as well as d7. Giving it up, just not a huge fan. Rook over here to g8, attacking the bishop. Bishop here to f6. Now the queen comes up here to d8, but it's not doing as much. Bishop takes. Now the rook comes down and exchanges. Bishop down here to f6. Rook to g6, rook here to b7. Both the bishops are now being attacked. But now after the rook comes down here and takes on b4, see how different this is than the current game state that we had just a few moves ago. Vladimir Kramnik was completely, attacking on the queen side of the board. He has pawns here on a7 and d7, and just decided to change up his strategy, give up those pawns for not too much on the board state. He does have the 2 rooks, but at the end of the day, I do think he had a stronger attack if he just continued with his game plans, keeping these up here and then continuing to develop his pieces around the board. Vladimir continues with king up here to a2, knight to c2, attacking the rook, rook to c1. Knight comes back here to d4. This knight's just so active, putting so much pressure on white, has to really deal with every single move. Bishop up here to d3, rook to a4, forcing the king to come back. Knight here to b3, rook check, rook comes here to e1, check, and then the king comes here to d5, and yes, it was in check, and it moves over here to d5, and it's attacking this pawn, but more importantly, it is opening up the door for this bishop to protect this square here on a1, which is a huge threat, something that a lot of players, they wouldn't even see because they're just thinking, oh, the king is moving. But now that this rook can come down here to a1 and attack, that is just another thing that Vladimir Kramnik has to worry about. We see king to c2, a knight up here to d4, check, king back here to b1. Now knight swings over here to f3. It was blocking the bishop, but now it is free as well. So attacking the rook, Also, rook can come down to a1. So many threats on the board. Really, the only saving grace that white could have here is just try to take on f6, recognizing that it's not going to be the best exchange. But now the knight comes down here to e1, bishop down here to f1. You could gobble up some pawns. I think at the end of the day, this is going to be doable for white. It's not going to be easy. He's going to lose this pawn here on c5, but I think he could probably get a draw out of it. But after knight to f3, played the very curious move of rook to d1. Not doing anything. There is a discovered attack that could happen if the bishop moves here, but that's just absolutely not going to happen. I think Vladimir Kramnik just forgot the fact that the rook had come down here to a1, and this was pretty much the end of it. We did see, Vladimir play this out a few more moves, but king here to c2, rook takes here on d1, bishop comes back here. If we were to see the king takes, because some people might look at this and they say, well, why would you just not take? Well, okay, if king takes here on d1, pawn to h2 is a dagger. There's no great way to stop this. Really, you need your lights for a bishop here to be protecting the square, but it can't do that. If the rook tries to swing over and protect that, well, you could just have bishop to h4. This is being protected by the knight. There's no way to stop this pawn from pushing. That would be a quick end for white. So in the game, didn't take the rook. I mean, no good move from white here. Brings his bishop back here to a6. Rook here to d2, check. King down here to c1. Bishop b2 check, king over here b1, and then we see the king take here on a c5, bishop up here b7. Yes, this is now attacking the knight here on f3, and subsequently after the knight were to move, also attacking the square here on h1, which is fine. But knight up here to e5, attacking the rook, rook here to f6, and then the move pawn to f3, just so deadly, just stops white from really doing too much. This knight's protecting it. So now the pawn can push. It's blocking the bishop from attacking. There's just no way to overcome from this. Rook here to f5, pinning down the knight, but sure, there's other ways that black can stop this. He could just move his king if he wanted to a couple different ways. After pawn to f2 just says, yeah, I'm not even worried about what you're doing over here. I'm just going to go ahead and push my pawn forward with f2. There's just no way to stop this. Can't take the knight right here. The bishop is protecting it. So, Fabiano Caruana has done a great job in the endgame of coordinating all of his pieces, pushing his pawns. He waited for a long time. We saw Vladimir push all of his once, and then he just gave them all up. Fabiano waited for many, many moves to make sure that he stopped any threats, and only then is when he pushed his own pawns, and at the end of the day, he came out victorious. So Fabiano Caruana is now in first place, half a point ahead of Vladimir Kramnik, and so congratulations to him. He got so close 2 years ago, almost winning, going into the last round, had an opportunity to win, so you know that he's looking to come out victorious and play Magnus Carlsen in November. But thank you guys for watching round 4. We still have quite a few rounds, a couple more weeks left of play. But thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.